A Civic Type R. Honda's gone a long way from the original Civic. They'd had a little bitty two-cylinder air-cooled motorcycle engine to this 306 horsepower monster. This is one special Honda Civic. Now, certainly not a cheap Econobox car. A customer recently bought this one brand new. It's a 2019 for about $38,000. They're not giving them away. Now, unlike other Civics, this thing gets 22 in the city and 28 on the highway, which is horrible gas mileage for a car this small. But on the other hand, when you check under the hood, that's really not bad gas mileage for an engine that puts out 306 horsepower. I mean, just a while back, people thought it was really something that they could get 100 horsepower out of every liter engine size. This thing is 2 liters. It's got 306, so it's got more than 150 horsepower per liter. It's a lot of power for a small car. After all, Honda's really known as an engine company. They make more 4-stroke internal combustion engines every year than any other company in the world. And in this case, the R isn't just some fake name stuck up. This thing is really made for racing. You might think, oh, all this stuff, it looks like a toy. It's not a toy. Everything serves a purpose. From the air dam on the back, when you're going really fast, helps downforce. And even when you go up here, you'll notice these. Well, those are to create vortexes so that it works even better. This was designed by engineers. This wasn't some kid making a cool looking toy. There's reason behind all of this. And as we go down the side, this isn't style. These flares are to help cool the engine and the brakes. This thing was designed with racing in mind. Check out these giant calipers. They're Brembo, top of the line racing brakes. Drilled rotors so you don't get fade when you're racing, slamming on the brakes, stopping on the gas. This is a serious driver's car. As we go to the back of the car, this isn't just for show. This is an engineered, tuned exhaust system. Makes a nice sound too, and a rather unique expression, having a triple. Not a double, but a triple. Now as we go inside, you can see it's set up for racing. Not fancy leather stuff, but serious racing seats when you're cornering. And this thing, man, does it corner. Start it up. Of course, being a Honda, it starts right up first thing. Got all kinds of fancy stuff in the dash. And if you mess around with the computer setup, it can even be run for track racing, keep laps in it. This is a serious car. Honda links, app links, settings, navigation. This is a seriously designed car for a driver. And as with any serious driver's car, what's smack in the middle? Not a speedometer, the tachometer, so you can match revs while you're driving. And you want to race around? You can put it on race suspension, or you can put it on normal, or you can put it on comfort. You're not racing around, you want a little more comfortable? You can make the suspension system softer so it rides better. 6-speed standard transmission. Honda makes great standard transmissions. They're killer for shifting. As we get out, look at this. It's a 4-door. Hey, now he's got it down for his dogs and stuff. Shows the seats go down. You got quite a bit of room. When you put the seats up, there's still a reasonable amount of space for sitting. It's not that tiny. And yes, it does have a trunk, regular sized trunk. You can put stuff. Like I say, if you flop the seats back, you got a lot of space to carry stuff. It's a handy utilitarian car too. But of course, that's not why you buy a Civic Type R. You buy a Civic Type R to drive fast. Why would you pay $38,000 up if you just want a little utilitarian car? Go get a plain Civic then. Don't spend all this money. Now this thing just doesn't look fast and have a big engine. It's got a special front suspension for racing. This thing is made for cornering. I've driven actual race cars. This thing is pretty close. You get real tight steering this thing. Cornering like mad. You can see it's low to the ground. This thing was designed for going fast, both in a straight line, more importantly, on curves. This thing eats up the twisties. Not really surprising though, but Honda started as a motorcycle company. This is kind of like a 4-wheel motorcycle. For people who are getting old like me, that the 2-wheel ones are getting a little bit too dangerous. This thing, this low to the ground, it's made to corner. The lower you go, the better they corner. It is a little bit rough riding on bumpy roads. This thing wasn't made for that. It's made for going fast. It'll go down the road. Even a normal Civic isn't the greatest ride in the world. But they've made it as good as they can with their active suspension system. You can put it on the comfort setting, so it's going to ride as good as it can in town. But then as soon as you either get on a track or you're out on the highway, put it in a racing mode, it's going to be a lot stiffer and it's really going to handle well. Now, if we had X-ray vision, we could see this has a very lightweight chassis. The hood's all aluminum. It's a very strong yet light car. It's made for going fast. That is its main purpose in life. Now, just to compare, my Celica there has 110 horsepower in a 2,600 pound vehicle. This has 306 horsepower in a vehicle that only weighs 400 pounds more than that. So, you got an extra almost 200 horsepower for 400 pounds extra weight. It's a lot of power. Now, purists might say, hey, the Celica weighs less than this. Well, the reason this weighs more, it's got solid, heavy-duty racing components. You can't make things light and cheap if you're going to drive it as hard as this thing. This thing is made for speed, and you got to have some kind of weight with speed, strong parts. You're not going to be using lightweight, cheap plastic suspension parts on a car with that much power. They'd snap. This thing is solidly built. So in this case, some weight is actually a good thing. You don't want a super light, fast car. Be too light, take off. So this is a happy medium between a lot of speed, strength, so it'll last, both in terms of how long it'll last in mileage and how much it can take on the road when you're really racing around. You don't want some cheap part breaking off when you're doing 100-something miles an hour. Now, I know some people are going to see this Earth Dreams technology and they're going to say, oh, I don't want to buy this. It has oil dilution problems. But, that's not correct. It's the 1.5 liter Honda engines that have the oil dilution problems, not the 2-liter ones that they put in this screaming monster. They're arguing back and forth about the oil dilution problems anyway. And what it comes down to, basically, they seem to be diluting before the engine's warmed up. This little thing, man, it warms up fast. It's set for speed. Doesn't take long to warm these up. So even if you're only driving a few miles, this thing's warmed up fast. It's not like the little 1.5 liter. But enough talk, let's take this thing for a spin. Start her up. Yeah, we'll roll up the windows. It may be a little race car, but it still has all the conveniences of air conditioning, a nice backup camera. So let's see how it accelerates. Takes off fast, especially at high RPMs. That's what this engine was made for. Now, it's not a particularly quiet car inside. It's made for zipping around. But man, the suspension, this thing is so tight. You turn that wheel, and the brakes, man, they're killer with those big Brembos. Like I said, you're gonna feel bumps in this car. It's more of a race car, not something that you tootle around and rides like a Lexus. It handles and rides like a race car. If you're buying one of these, that's what you're looking for. But even though it is fast, look at it. Smooth as can be sitting there idling. You can't feel this 4-cylinder engine. No vibration. The stick shift isn't shaking at all. These are perfectly designed engines. And you take it out on a highway. Hey, that's where this thing shines. Crisp steering. You don't get any understeering or oversteering. This thing tracks great. You want to blow the doors off one of these Mercedes? Hey, no problem at all. If it hadn't been made on the outside with all this racing stuff, it'd be a great sleeper car. Now, I do have to say, one thing that surprises me in this car is, it is just a front-wheel drive car, but it doesn't have any of that classic oversteer. It handles great. Honda has figured out how to make a little race car that's front-wheel drive. Now, they're talking they might make an all-wheel drive one or ever, but as it stands, this is front-wheel drive, and you would never know it by driving it around. It handles great. I realize that if you're going to drive one of these things seriously the way it was designed, you're playing in the upper RPMs. It doesn't really have a bunch of kick until it gets over 5,000 RPMs. When the turbo and the variable valve timing kicks in, then it just screams. So this has to be driven like a race car if you're driving it seriously. You shift it at slow speeds, it'll run fine like any Honda Civic. You got to get the revs up there if you really want to take full advantage of what this thing was designed for. Here's a 2020 Mazda Miata Grand Touring. Now, the Mazda Miata is the only 2-seat sports car in the history of mankind that's sold more than 1 million units. It says it right there. And how do they do it? Well, 3 ways. They're fun to drive, and they last. They don't break down. Now, the first Miata was 1989. Back then, sports cars were notorious for breaking down, having problems. Mazda fixed that. They made a reliable, cute, fun little car that didn't break. Before the Miata, lots of people loved British sports cars, Italian sports cars, but they had one big problem. They broke down all the time. They weren't reliable. Back when I started in the United States in 1989, these things were $13,800. What a deal for the money. Now, what you see is what you get. A beautiful looking little sports car. Not a race car by any stretch of the imagination. The original had 116 horsepower. This one, it has 181. Nothing outrageous, but hey, it can run a long time because there's no turbocharger. It's a very reliable engine, and a long time ago, they want the timing change. You don't have to worry about changing a rubber timing belt. Those days are long gone. Rather than going for insane speed like, say, a Honda S2000, which, by the way, they don't make anymore, this went for insane reliability. I've got customers with Miatas that have over 300,000 miles on the engines. It can run a long time, especially if they're like this one with the 6-speed standard transmission. I never was a fan of the automatics, but truth be told, the newer ones, the automatic transmissions are much better than they used to be. They've redesigned stuff, and they're not bad, but they're nowhere near as much fun as this thing. Because 181 horsepower is 181 horsepower. You made it with a standard transmission. You can have a lot of fun. Like I say, it's not a race car, but it's a lot of fun to drive with a standard transmission. This particular one's the convertible, a little bit slower, 0 to 60 in a little over 6 seconds. So it's no speed demon. That Corvette, it did it in 2.4 seconds. But it does have a top speed of 135 miles an hour, so it's no slouch. And the color, it's insane. This is called Soul Red Crystal Metallic. It is the best red I have ever seen in my life. You want a classic red sports car? Here it is, sitting in my driveway. And to top it all off, it's got a really nice sunroof. We'll start it up. And we'll push the magic sunroof button. What a sunroof! You get all kinds of sun. You don't have to do anything except push a button. And you got a nice stable top too. It isn't open. Mazda Miatas were always fun convertibles, but they were the rag top, the soft top. The windows would fog off. Tops, the ultraviolet rays of the sun ruin them. They look bad, they rip, and you got to put an expensive new one in. Plus, if you've never driven one, they are noisy as can be. There's no insulation in them. So when you're driving on a highway, you hear the 18-wheelers going around you. This has a nice metal top. So it's quiet when you're going down the road when it's up. And when you put it down, you don't have to mess with it, worry about stuff ripping and tearing and fading in the sun because it's made out of metal. And we check the inside. It's a nice little sports car, well appointed, black, chrome, nice leather, and man, does that red paint pop. But it's a modern sports car. It's got everything you want, it's got charging ports, and it's a true sports car. What's in the middle? The tachometer. Speedometer's over here. Tachometer's here. Good gas mileage. I've been driving like a lunatic. It still gets 32.8 miles per gallon. And a well thought out selector for the computer. Very easy to use. Well, if you're right-handed. I happen to be left-handed, but well, that's life. Right behind me, a cute little glove box. It's in the back instead of the front. It's got a lock too if you leave the top down. And it's a Japanese car. Made in Japan. Freezing cold AC. And yes, it has electronic controls, traction, and all kinds of safety devices. But if you know how to drive, and you drive like a maniac, you can turn that off. And you can turn off that assistance too. So, you want to drive hard and you know how to drive, you can do that. It isn't one of these force you to drive wimpy cars. You can drive it whatever way you want. You have the choice. Just flick the button. So let's see how it drives. Now just sitting there idling, you can see. It's a quiet car. Now let's see what it can do from a standing start in first gear. Not too shabby. And that's why you want to turn the traction control off. So you might have thought, oh, 181 horsepower, you can't have any fun. You can have loads of fun in this thing if you know how to drive. After all, it's a classic rear-wheel drive sports car. Stubby, short, engine and transmission towards the middle. And they even thought about acoustics. With all this special stuff, with the top down, it is not that noisy on the highway. As you can see here, the engine's been moved back reasonably far to make the center of gravity better. And yes, it is the latest Skyactiv version of reliable Mazda 4-cylinder Miata engines. These things can last a really long time if you just change the oil regularly. Unlike many expensive sports cars, these things are easy and cheap to maintain. When you combine the style with the color, with the fun factor, if you're looking for a 2-seat sports car, I would say look no further. And look, miracles of miracles. It even has a trunk. Now way back here, the top goes inside, but it still has a trunk you can put some stuff in. And it's got a subtle, aggressive front too on it. Check it out. And those beautiful chrome style wheels showing off the red paint. Man, it is a beautiful looking car. Yet as far as a sports car can be practical, it's practical, and as I said, it's made in Japan. Now it's rare that old Scotty gets blown away by a little car. Maybe it's because the first car I had was a red sports car. Maybe I'm trying to revert to my past. All I know is they didn't build anything like this in the 1960s. A lot of people said, oh, everything was better in the past. In this case, no. The present, much better little red sports car. All right, people always said Toyota Camrys, they're boring, right? Well, Toyota decided to do something about it. So they came out with the Toyota Camry TRD. Now, Toyota only makes 6,000 of these a year. They wanted to basically say, hey, Camrys are not boring. This has the V6 Camry 301 horsepower engine, and actually, the TRD is the cheapest way to get that engine. If you're going to buy it in a luxury Camry, you're going to pay many thousands more to get that same engine. So in this case, you get the Toyota Race Development Camry, but it's cheaper than the other one. Kind of interesting. My wife loves Camrys. She didn't like this because it's got a stiffer suspension. It's really set up to be much stiffer, so it really corners well. But the family man doesn't like it because you can't fold the back seats down, because they stiffened up the whole body too. And there's a brace in there, so you can't take the seat down to get it in the trunk. And people with families, they don't like that. But, you know, I don't think he's going to start a family for a while, so you never know what's going to happen. But it's got plenty of room in the seats. It's just you can't fold the seats back. And for the family or luxury oriented, this is what the TRD doesn't have. It's a pretty big list. No moonroof, no wireless charging, no dynamic grid lines on backup camera, no heated seats, no heated steering wheel, no backseat console air vents, no folding backseat, no backseat armrests with cup holders, no ventilated seats, no head-up display, no 360-degree camera, no auto-dimming rearview mirror. The standard 9-inch touchscreen is not in these. Only single-zone climate, not dual. And last but not least, imitation leather with fabric inserts versus leather trim. So this has imitation leather instead of real leather. But here's what you get. They souped up the front suspension. They souped up the back suspension. Sway bar is 44% stiffer, and the back one is 67% stiffer. Corner like a dream and you don't get body roll. Plus, these wheels are lighter and wider, there's less momentum, and of course you want to stop too, so these things have better brakes. The disc brakes are bigger and better made. There's 2 calipers that squeeze in. The factory ones only have 1. These have 2 on each side. On this side and on this side. So they have 4, where the regular Camrys only have 2, so you got more stoppability, more control. They're regular discs. Now, they're ventilated inside, this side, that side, and there's a vent in the middle. But you notice they're not drilled or slotted. And that's because Toyota doesn't want their customers to get mad at them. People think, oh, I'm gonna drill and slot my rotors for racing, blah, 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 blah. They make a lot of noise. They warp and wear out faster, too. Most people don't like it. It's fine if you're racing a car. You slam on the gas, you slam on the brake, you slam on the gas, you're going around a racetrack. They overheat, they'll actually glow red, right? Most people don't drive like that on the street. When you stop with these, the first time you stop, they'll actually stop somewhat faster because it's all metal. They've got more surface area to dissipate the heat. Now, they would eventually fade if you kept slamming on the brakes, slamming on the gas, slamming on the brakes. That's why the race cars have drilled and slotted ones to dissipate the heat faster. These, for one time only, will stop faster because they got a bigger surface area they're squeezing, and it can stop the car quicker. It's a racing thing. You don't need drilled and slotted stuff. You know, people see them. You see them on motorcycles. A lot of the stuff is just for show. It's also lowered. It's a lower car. You can tell it's a lot lower than a stock Camry. The lower a car is, the better it's going to corner. But unfortunately, the rougher it's going to ride. I've driven actual race cars, and let me tell you, the fillings fell out of my teeth. Those things are just suspension-less, practically. They want to get as low as they can to the ground so they can corner as fast as they can possibly corner. They don't care about the ride. People might laugh and say, oh, those drivers, they're not real athletes, they're just driving cars around. You try driving one of their cars around and you'll change your opinion. I drove a NASCAR car around once, and when you're hanging on doing those curves and it's trying to throw you to the other side of the car, those guys are really strong. Don't think they aren't. They're not just sitting there driving a car like a truck driver. They gotta be really strong to handle those things. Now, of course, it is a Camry, so they're extremely dependable. It's got everything: air conditioning, electric power steering, everything you want in a normal car. And we'll pop off this stupid beauty cover. You know what I think of those things. Blah. Here, why don't you just leave it like this? It's more interesting. You get to see everything. And of course, it's a modern engine. Got a timing chain. You don't have to mess with the belt. What I like about it is it's naturally aspirated. None of this turbo, high pressure crap. This engine can last a long time. With 301 horsepower, hey, it's got a lot of oomph for a car this size. And notice, it's got a souped up exhaust, dual exhaust, makes a decent sound. Not a fast car, just driving around town, he gets about 20 miles a gallon. You get a lot closer to 30 if you go on the highway all the time. Now when we look inside, you can see why young guys like it. It's all blacked out, a little black and red stripes, but of course it's a Toyota. It's always going to start. This one has a little zoom to it. It's got all the modern amenities. And yes, for you serious drivers, you can turn the traction control off. Then it warns you. And yes, it is a regular Camry inside. Look at all the leg room. Toyota just decided. They were sick of people saying, oh, Camrys, they run forever, but they're so boring, I'd never buy one. Let's take it for a ride, see how boring this car is. Great backup camera. Yes, it's a TRD. It doesn't have the 360-degree one, but you can see quite well with this backup camera. Now, here we go on the highway. The main thing is, man, these things handle like a dream. You can wiggle all over the road. You do not lose control. Indeed, it is not your father's Camry. That's why this guy's driving one. He's in his 20s. He wants to have some fun. But he's smart. Unlike his friend who bought a BMW, the endless money pit machine, he got something that he can basically probably drive for 20 or 30 years if he doesn't smash it up. Now, if you want 0 to 60, here we go. Yes, Camrys can burn rubber. It is a fun car to drive. And you'll notice, yes, you feel some of the bumps because it's a stiff suspension. If it was a regular Camry, it'd be somewhat smoother, but it wouldn't be as much fun to drive either. So you got a beautiful looking car, definitely much sportier, lower to the ground, handles like a dream, has the same horsepower. The exhaust is tuned. It's a little bit faster, 0 to 60, but you're not gonna look like your father's Camry driving this thing around. And it doesn't handle like it either. It really has good handling. They only make 6,000 of them a year. They're not mass producing them. But I think they hit the nail on the head for young people who want a fast, zippy car. Or old guys like me that think they're young. And of course it is Camry, so it's still got a big trunk. Only, like I said, you can't put those seats back to put stuff and pile it in, because they seriously did work on the suspension. These are serious driving cars. Realize that Mr. Toyota loved racing cars himself back in the day. He'd be proud of something like this. That's why they're only making 6,000 of them. They're making a statement. They're not like, we're going to sell 1 million of these. No, they're not going to make 1 million of them, but they'll sell every single one of them they make. I can guarantee you that. Now, the owner of this car was going to buy a 2020, and the guy said, go ahead, come look at it. Well, he came the next day and it was gone. Somebody had bought it, so he had to buy 2021. So, realize these things are relatively scarce. If you want to get one, hey, I'd say sooner than later, or you won't be one of the 6,000 that gets to buy one every year. Because after all, who knew a Camry could look like a race car and actually handle like a race car too? This is a wolf in sheep's clothing, although the clothing is kind of wolfy too, so that's not the greatest analogy. Why you should buy a Lexus. But strangely enough, I'm going to start with why you shouldn't buy a Lexus. And that's because they cost too much money. I'm cheap. I would have never bought one in the past, but I got this one for my wife years ago One of my customers got it from his father. They were tired of it, and I gave him $3,000 for the car, even though it only had 60,000 miles on it. Yeah, it was like 12 years old, but I don't care. I know these things can last. So when it was new in 2002, it was a $34,000 car. So basically, I paid less than 1/10 of the original price for a vehicle that I've had customers, yes, 300s, that had 400,000 miles on it. With 60,000 miles, 80% of its lifespan left. I would never buy a new one regardless of the cost because I think they're ugly. I like the old style front. Those new ones with those giant scowling mouth plastic front ends, I think that's one of the ugliest designs ever. And sure, a lot of cars are all copying now that big scowling front grille. People think, oh, that's popular, that's cool. And they go out and they buy something, they want it to look like that. Me, I think it's ugly. I like the old ones. They're better looking. Face it, you want a big nah in the front of your car, it just looks stupid. Now the reason I love this Lexus is because, hey, I'm getting older. These things are really comfortable and luxurious. Now, this car is 18 years old, but the seats, the leather's still in really good shape. It's amazing. And being a Lexus, things hardly ever break. Now, in the interest of honesty, yes, I put lots of parts on this car, but for a rather odd reason. I use it as a test car to test out brakes, rotors, all kinds of car parts. I tell them, send me stuff for a 2002 ES 300. I'll see if your product's any good. And here's something that I found out that kind of surprised even me. A couple years ago, a company sent me brand new front struts for the suspension. So I put them on this car, and at the time the car was 16 years old with the original struts. And lo and behold, it rode much worse with the brand new struts. Now they weren't original equipment struts, they were aftermarket ones. But it rode so much worse with the new ones that I put the old ones back on. So here we're talking about a car with 16-year-old struts that still rode fine. The new aftermarket ones rode worse than these old ones. They can last that long? That tells me they're building these things right. Check inside the door. Made in Japan. There's just something about serious Japanese car manufacturers, and motorcycle manufacturers for that matter. They take it seriously. They keep building the car quality. You don't see that with cars that are built in lots of other countries. No, it's not a race car. It's got plenty enough horsepower with a V6. You can cruise all day long. When we drove to Big Bend, the speed limit was like 85 miles an hour. We did 90 the whole way on cruise control. Didn't skip a beat. It's got the proven Aisin transmission. I changed the fluid a couple of times. That's it. Still shifts like a dream. And sure, I upgraded the headlights. They look cooler, but that's the advantage of a platform like this. A lot of the parts that are newer style will fit on the older ones, especially aftermarket ones. So you can upgrade it if you want. Hey, I'd rather buy $250 worth of headlights than buy a brand new Lexus for what, $45,000, $50,000 these days, and up. But even though it still kind of looks and runs like a new car, the insurance on it is dirt cheap. It's an 18-year-old car. I gotta pay like $500 a year insurance on this thing. Check out the insurance on a new car. If it gets wrecked or stolen and it's a $60,000 car, they gotta put the $60,000 payout. Don't think your insurance is gonna be cheap on that. They got big giant trunks with lots of space. But really the main selling point is luxury, and they can last so long. Many luxury cars, hey, they fall apart. They want you to buy a new one every 4 or 5 years. These things weren't made that way. Take the engine, it's naturally aspirated, doesn't have a supercharger, doesn't have a turbocharger, isn't GDI high pressure injector. Just a plain old V6 fuel injected engine like in a Corolla or in a Toyota pickups. They're known for reliability. They can last a long time. You don't have to do anything to them but change the oil. I'm a fan of the V6 ones. I'm not really a fan of the big V8 ones. Yeah, they're a bit more luxurious, but as they age, those engines are more expensive to work on. They're much harder to work on. Give you an idea, you got a V8 engine. In order to change the starter on a the later model ones, you got to pull the intake manifold off. You're going to spend over $1,000 changing the starter. I changed the starter out in this thing. I think it took me 15 minutes. Yeah, starters are going to wear out in any car, but guess what? I went to AutoZone and bought the starter. Been in there for 6 years, works perfectly fine. The advantage of this is a lot of it is just Toyota Camry parts. A lot of them are totally interchangeable, and there's a big aftermarket for them. So you can do what you want without having to spend a fortune at the Lexus dealer on their outrageously overpriced parts. And look, even when they're dirty, I haven't washed this thing in 2 weeks, they still look good. Of course, a lot of that depends on the color that you get in a car. If you're gonna get a black car, it's gonna look dirty in 2 hours anyways. But if you get a color like this, it doesn't show dirt all that bad, so you don't have to wash it as much. And like I said, the quality's just there. Take these leather seats. The previous luxury car that my wife had was an old Toyota Cressida, and those seats got so cracked it looked like the Grand Canyon inside. So I covered them with these great New Zealand pure wool seat covers that were like $250 a piece. But one day my wife said, I don't know, something's weird in my car. So I took those New Zealand sheepskin covers off, and inside those Cressida cracked leather seats, believe it or not, there was a colony of ants with eggs and everything. When I pulled it off, they scrambled and ran all over the place. I don't know what the heck they're doing on a mobile car that's driving around, but an entire colony of ants made inside. The leather seats were just not made that well then. But hey, these are 18 years old and they still look great. That's just what I call quality. Now I know some people are saying, oh, Scotty, how much did Lexus pay you to see how great their cars are? Well, I don't think they paid me anything, considering that I said I would never buy a brand new one, because I think those grills are as ugly as can be. I'm telling you a real life experience from myself and my many customers that have owned these things. And I'd never shell out for a new one. Heck, that kind of money, I'd rather send my grandkids to college than waste it on a car. But if you want luxury in a car that is going to last a really long time and hardly ever break down, and not be all that expensive to maintain either. I mean, you don't go to the dealer, just find a regular mechanic like me that works on it to take care of the thing. Stay away from hybrid Lexuses. My customers with hybrid Lexuses, they loved them when they were new, but then when they got 10 years or older and started to break down, man, the parts cost a fortune for them, because there's really no aftermarket for that hybrid stuff. You're talking dealer then, and the prices will just astound you. But if you're looking for a nice, reliable, long-lasting luxury car, hey, get yourself a Lexus that's got a V6 engine in it. Now here we have a 2003 Honda S2000. Probably the penultimate sports car Honda ever sold to the public, and this one has an interesting story. The owner bought this car for $15,000 with 16,000 miles on it, but interestingly enough, he did it in 2015. In this case, the owner was very smart. He was way before the curve. You couldn't touch this thing for anywhere near that. Not even twice it probably, for the shape this thing is in. These things are becoming real collector's items, and he did it before they became true collector's items. And you can see, he doesn't drive it much. He just took it out of the garage. Obviously, it's age and it doesn't have that many miles on it. He picked the right time to buy. Now, these cars were built basically around the engine. Their big fame is they were the most powerful naturally aspirated piston engine per liter. Now, you might say, okay, this thing only has 247 horsepower, but it's only got a 2-liter engine, 123.5 horsepower per liter. And nobody else was getting that much power without a turbo, without a supercharger. As you can see, it's a naturally aspirated engine. There's no tricks to these things other than fantastic engineering. And there it is, the infamous double overhead cam, 2-liter VTEC Honda engine. You see, there's no turbochargers, there's no superchargers. Just a piston gasoline engine that was probably one of the best designs ever made. This is a true driver's car. Unlike most of Honda's cars, it's rear-wheel drive. It's not front-wheel drive. It's a classic roadster. So you might say, okay, Scott, if it was such a great car, how come they only made them for 10 years and stopped making them? Well, guess what? There aren't that many classic drivers out there left anymore. Begin with, 96% of Americans don't even drive a standard. They drive automatics. So that leaves 4% of the population as your market. And unfortunately, in the end, when they finally stopped making these, there was the economic crunch, the gas crunch, and the sales just got so low that Honda just decided we're not going to make them anymore. It was purely a money-making decision. Let's face it, Honda makes more internal combustion engines than any company in the world. They really know what they're doing. And they certainly did when they built this. But it's also a giant corporation that wants to make a profit. They sell a lot of Civics, a lot of Accords. They sell all kinds of cars. And if they have one that isn't a big seller, it doesn't make any sense for them to keep producing something that isn't making them a lot of money. And people might say, oh, you know, the Mazda Miatas are cute little sports cars, and they sold over 1 million of them. Don't compare a Mazda Miata to this thing. If you know how to drive cars, you get in a Miata and say, okay, that's a fun little toy. You get in this thing, and it's an insane little sports car for serious drivers. You want to get a cheap little sports car? Get a Miata. A lot of people say they're girly cars, but I mean, hey, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. They are not performance cars like this thing. This is a serious performance driving car. Now look at Toyota. They brought the Supra back. Or did they? It has nothing to do with Toyota Supras. It's a BMW sports car made in Germany by BMW. It has nothing to do with Toyota. They didn't build the things. This was designed and built by Honda, something that they wanted to be proud of, and they did what they wanted to do with it, and then decided, hey, well, there's not enough people buying them, so not so much for that idea. Now, if you could find an original one like this, with such a small amount of mileage on it, for such a low price, or basically even twice what he paid for it, and you want one of these, you better snap it up fast before the price gets even higher. Because I guarantee you, they're never going to make them again, and you're never going to find such a vehicle that can last so long. This one hardly has any mileage on it. I've seen it with a couple 100,000, and they were still screamers with the original engines if taken care of. They built this thing to go fast. That's what it was designed for, and that's what it did. And the main thing is, unlike things like Ferraris, Porsches, they don't fall apart after a little while. They keep going. You can abuse these things. They're just like Honda motorcycles. And I'd say to people, go rev the engine up, listen to it, and they'd rim, rim. I said, no, rim, rim. And then take it out on a quarter-mile drag strip. They can take it. They're made for abuse. They want to be abused. As long as you change the oil and don't overheat them, they will last and keep ticking down the road. Listen to this thing. This is the heart of this car. Smooth, 4-cylinder. The engine's quiet, but it makes a decent sound. Now, the owner has kept it stock. That's what he wants. He doesn't want to have the police come every time he goes screaming down the street. A lot of guys will straight pipe these things. They're loud as can be. That's not what he wants. If you want to do that, go right ahead. The engine can take it. Old school. No backup camera on this baby. Well, now we're going to see what this thing can do with its 123.5 horsepower. And here we go. That's what this car is about. Pure speed and a little sportster. And if you really know about these things, yes, he had the retainer work done on this thing because it's the early model. It's not the 2200, it's the 2000 cc. And he had it done in New York by an expert who then he said scared the pants off of them when they were taking corners on 2 wheels, spinning all over the place. And he said, you know, you might get new tires for this thing. Now, it's a marvelous 2-seater. Yes, it's a 2-seater. They didn't even bother with back seats because they were smart. Why put a back seat when the only thing you can fit in there is a bag of groceries? They were serious about building a 2-seater. 2-seaters in the United States have never been all that popular. And it was a whole bunch of market things that the price of gas went up, the economy went down, sports cars weren't selling, then Honda decided they're not going to make these things anymore. And if you just look at the car, inside it's just a plain looking car, right? You don't buy this car for what it looks like, even though it's beautiful on the outside. You buy it for how it drives. As you can see on the tachometer, the red doesn't start until you get to 9,000 RPMs. And that's serious, 9,000 RPMs. It's not a joke. These engines were built to take. Now, you know, I like my Celica. I really liked it when a guy brought the GT4 over here, all-wheel drive turbo. It was nothing compared to how this thing accelerates. You can't compare them either. This is a rear-wheel drive, roadster, more horsepower per liter. It's just a load of fun for a serious car driver. It's a limited market, but they don't make them anymore. The ones that are left in good shape, they're getting to be like hen's teeth, scarce as can be. The prices are really going up now if you're thinking about getting one. My advice is sooner than later, or you're not going to be able to find a good deal. You'll be priced out of the market, or you'll just pay way too much for the vehicle because it'll just keep going up, and there aren't any more being made, and I can guarantee you they're never going to make any more. Today, with internal combustion engines, you have stricter and stricter emissions. In a couple of days, a guy's bringing me an RX-8. They were fun cars to drive around with their rotary engines, completely different type of vehicle. They stopped making them. And they stopped making them mainly because in Europe, they couldn't pass the latest emissions that they came up at the end of the RX-8 run. They just said, we can't get it to pass European emissions. If we can only sell them in the United States or somewhere, it's not worth a bother. So they stopped making them. It had nothing to do with they didn't run right. It's that they just can't meet strict emissions because they're gasoline. Well, electrics don't have to meet any kind of emissions. That'll be the future of insane sports cars for sure as time goes on, because they're always a limited market and they're generally toys. This doesn't have very many miles. He hides it in the garage. If you had an electric car, so what if it can only go 200 miles and then had to be recharged? You're probably not driving it to 200 miles, so it doesn't really matter. You just want pure speed. And this thing, hey, it was pure speed in its day for a really affordable price back in the day. And if you're really into engine technology and engine history, this is a car that you'd love to own, because not only is it fascinating in terms of its technology, it holds up over time. It is a Honda engine, the #1 manufacturer of combustion engines in the world. They knew what they were doing when they built this thing, because more than anything else, this was basically made as a showcase for Honda. They wanted to have a zippy little sports car. You don't have to throw a turbocharger, don't have to put a supercharger on it. They got a lot of fun and a lot of horsepower, and they knew by not putting all that added crap on, the engines could really hold up over time, as this one had, as most of the ones that I've seen have. Unless they're extremely abused and over-revved, these engines should just keep going and going. And at the same time, you have this beast that, if you drive it conservatively, he thinks he gets about 24, 25 miles a gallon in the thing. You put it in top gear and you're only going 55 miles an hour, it's totally doable. With this kind of speed, that's really good gas mileage. Because the Mustang that I had with the 667 horsepower, I got about 3 miles a gallon in that thing. That certainly was faster than this, but at what price? Anyways, the Mustang was cheated. It had a big old supercharger on it. If you put a supercharger on this thing, it probably would have gone faster than that. So now you know a little bit more about the Honda S2000s. Why they're an interesting piece of history that keeps on ticking and is so much fun to drive without breaking the bank. Although, if you do try to collect them now, probably will break your bank because the prices keep going up and up. I saw a guy the other day paid $70,000 for one, and it had a lot more mileage than this thing had on it. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.